Welcome to episode 66 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this episode at the show notes, which is www.7, all spelled out, so SEVEN health.com/66.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Real Health Radio. Today's episode is a little different to usual. It's actually a recording of an interview that I did as part of a summit called Overcoming Emotional Eating, and it was put on by Elena Terziyska. I apologize, I'm probably butchering your last name, but it was recorded around the May time. And for anyone who's listened to me be an interviewee before, my intro story about how I got into doing what I'm doing is probably going to be fairly similar to the last time you've heard me tell it. But after that, it should hopefully provide you with some useful information relating to people's relationship with food or emotional eating, or how much control we have over our long-term weight, intuitive eating, and much more. So look, without further preamble, this is my interview as part of the Overcoming Emotional Eating Summit.
Well, hi everyone, and welcome to Overcoming Emotional Eating Summit. Now, our next guest is someone who is absolutely amazing. His name is Chris Sandel, and I'll let him introduce himself and tell you all about what he does. So, welcome, Chris.
Hiya, thanks for having me here.
It's absolutely amazing to have you on board. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you do, how you end up doing what you're doing, and how did that whole passion of yours become what you are now?
Okay. So I'm originally from Sydney, Australia. I moved over to the UK 13 years ago, or 13 years in the summer. I was 21, finished a business degree, and had no idea what I wanted to do. So I thought I would travel around Europe, travel around the world, and then try and work it out. And then have ended up just never leaving. But as part of that, I moved over here and moved in with a couple. And within about a handful of weeks, one of the ladies in the couple was doing a detox. And at the time, I'd really given no attention in my whole life to what I ate. I'm someone who is naturally lean, and the only connection up until that point that I ever made was between someone's weight and what they ate. And because I could eat whatever I want and never put on weight, I never really gave it a second thought. I'm also very lucky in that I come from a household where there was no diet talk when we were growing up, and I'm very fortunate for that. I've got obviously a mother, I've got a sister. I can't remember them ever going on diets, and there was really no focus on body or body size. So from that perspective, I'm very lucky, and probably not the norm of what happens for a lot of people. So when I moved over to the UK, as I said, I really not given much thought to food at all, and slightly to my detriment, because I had terrible skin at the time. And a lot of that was down to me eating a pretty poor quality diet. I'd gone to university and just started eating lots of Burger King, KFC, kebabs, was drinking a lot of booze, and just never really thought about it so much. And so I would go to the doctor and get a course of antibiotics for 3 months, and my skin would improve. I'd stop that. It would then start to come back, and I would then go and get another course of antibiotics. And that probably went on for about 3 years. And so then when I moved over to the UK, my course of antibiotics had run out. My skin was getting not so great again. And so, as I said, the lady in the couple, after I'd been here probably 5 or 6 weeks, said, look, I'm doing this detox. Why don't you do it with me? It'll probably help your skin. Let's see what happens. And so I did that with her, and it was 4 weeks. And to just tell you now, I don't recommend people do detoxes. I don't think they're very good things for the majority of people. And normally it's because of A, the person who's doing it, but B, the extreme nature that is recommended as part of the detox. And in this instance, it wasn't particularly extreme. It was, you're not allowed to have, it was a vegan diet, but you also weren't allowed to have much in the way of oils or much in the way of sugar or salt. So lots of fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and beans and pulses and brown rice, and there wasn't any amount on. You can only eat a certain amount. Like you could eat as much as you wanted, and it was for 4 weeks. So in the whole scheme of what people do from a detox perspective now, it wasn't particularly extreme. And what I noticed as part of doing it, and I would say for me it was fairly extreme. I'd been eating foods that were very much about the palate and me really not giving much thought to it, and now I was having to do much more food preparation and do all of these things that I hadn't done before. But what I noticed through that experience was my skin got a lot better. And really from then on, I made the connection between what I ate and how it affected my body. And so then for the next couple of years, I would just flip-flop between doing things right, in inverted commas, and what I thought was very healthy at that time, and then not being so healthy and what you would associate with a normal 21-year-old who's moved to the other side of the world and is living without his parents and being able to go out and all of that kind of thing. And just noticing the difference between the two. And at some point after a couple of years, I was reading more on the topic of nutrition. I was bringing it up more in conversation, and at some point decided, look, this is what I want to do. And so decided to study it. And I studied at the College of Naturopathic Medicine in London called CNM, and was studied there from 2006 to 2008. And then in 2009 set up my own practice as a nutritionist. And that's been quite an interesting journey as well. So I guess when I first started out, a lot of what I thought I would be seeing in practice is very different to what it is today. So I think the idea that a lot of people have when they think of a nutritionist is someone who is eating pretty poorly, so eating probably the way that I did when I started out, McDonald's or Burger King, or not being very good at cooking, and these assumptions, and they're going to have someone help them be healthier by making all these changes. And what I started to see in practice was a lot more people who were doing the things that they'd been told to be doing and thinking that they were doing the right things. So people who were eating lots of fruits and vegetables, people who are doing lots of juicing, who are steaming their vegetables, who are having stir-fried rice, who are doing lots of exercise and really focusing on the things that they've been told to be focusing on. But as part of this, they were often coming to me saying, I'm wanting to lose weight. And then they turn up into my practice, and I'd look at them. I'm like, there is no weight for you to be losing. You are also already a very lean person. I'd be looking at their food logs. It was already pretty restrictive, and there was some real fears and worries and anxiety around their eating. And so, because I started seeing more and more of these types of clients, I quickly realized that this was an area that I needed to spend more time focusing on. And so I've gone a slightly different route than a lot of nutritionist practitioners, in that a lot of my focus now is working with people with either disordered eating or relationship with food issues or body issues, and getting them to understand like where that's coming from, how I can help them with those things, and using food much more, and my advice in this sense much more as a guide to help them to understand like what is really healthy for them. So yeah, that's how, and I know that's quite a long-winded answer to your question, but that's how I've got to where I am today.
No, that's actually an amazing answer. And something that you mentioned quite early on really caught my attention was when you said that you grew up in a family with obviously like very healthy relationship, with their own body and food in general. How important do you think that part is, like to grow up to be in a family where the word diet is never mentioned, and where food isn't like such an important topic that is constantly talked about?
Look, I think it is very important, but I also realize how out of control that is for nearly every individual. Mm-hmm. So while I think it did really benefit me, it's through nothing that I did made that a reality. And so I think what is more the reality, unfortunately for most people, is they do grow up in a household environment where that is present, and it does have an impact. And so it's then, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, looking at how do we minimize the impact of that, or how do we reverse some of the damage that's been done. because of the world that we now live in and how pervasive that stuff is.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is like something that we've talked about with a lot of people is like the whole social media kind of image of, of how one is supposed to look and, how people should be looking in their own body, and how that achieving that, leanest figure will actually take them to the most happy place. And now what you've mentioned about, having clients who actually come to see you where there is, a clear sign that they don't actually need to lose weight. What do you think that, is that whole idea? How is that having an impact on, how we see ourselves and how we perceive ourselves?
Well, look, I think one of the big things is that we are very much sold a lie of when I get to this level of leanness, or when I lose this amount of weight, or when I fit into certain dress size, that all of these things are going to start happening. And those things could be that I will get a promotion, I'll meet the man or woman of my dreams, or my current relationship will improve because it would be better if I was thinner, leaner, whatever it may be. I'll be able to go on holidays and imagine how amazing those holidays will be when I step onto the beach, etc. And it just goes on in terms of all of these things will be different when. And the sad reality of it is, for a lot of people who then make those changes, and I'd say the vast majority who make those changes, they don't then have that real nice change in their feelings. Like, they don't have that, I'm just so confident, I love walking into rooms and I'm turning heads and I feel so good in my own body. What typically happens is people make certain changes and then there's that feeling of, I'm just hanging on by a thread. Like, this is all going to unravel at some point. Or whatever change someone makes, it's quickly forgotten about, and then there's some other new goal. And so it's that mentality of enough is never enough. And it's because everything is relative. It's like when you get a pay increase at work, and you're like, oh, wow, it's going to be amazing. I've now got this extra 500 pounds or whatever it is coming in each month. Like, I'm going to be able to save that. It's going to be just so much easier. And within about 2 months, you're like, how the hell did I ever get by with earning what I earned before? Because all you do is you make adjustments. And the same thing happens with people making changes to their body in a lot of ways, is that no matter what happens, you then have a new set of goalposts and a new set of challenges that you're now aiming towards, and your new reality is just like, this is just where I'm at. I'm still disappointed in where I am. And that's for the precious few who are actually able to make those changes and then have them stick. For the vast majority of people, their attempts don't lead to the changes. And so they then stay in that place of, when I get to that promised land, then it will be different. And for them, it's always that like chasing of, it will be different then. And it's a really difficult thing for people to let go of, because there is this, I need that motivating thing in my life. I need that vision or that hope that things are going to get better. And then it becomes pinned on all of this thing that relates to their weight or their appearance, when really for a lot of people that's just a cover for so many other things going on in their life, that it's easier to reduce everything in your life to, it will be better when I lose weight, than to look at the reality of the situation and think, you know what, there's a hell of a lot of stuff going on here that's going on from lots of different angles that I need to be tackling. Rather than wanting to look at it that way, it's like, I'll just focus on my weight and make it about that.
That's an amazing point. So what would you say are the, if someone came to you with, with issues like that, what would you say are the 3 most important steps, that you would start with?
Okay, so 3 most important steps. Number 1 would have to be becoming okay with the weight they're at, or at least becoming okay with the idea that we don't have ultimate control over our weight. And one of the things I always say to clients is, you have influence over your weight, you don't have control. The same way as we have influence over our health, we don't have ultimate control. Same way as in relationships, we have influence over our relationships, we don't have control. And so getting people to be okay with that idea and realize that you can be doing certain things that may make it more likely to help you lose weight, but what happens in the end is not ultimately within your control. And if you're going to do that, then you, from my perspective anyway, and people are adults, they can do whatever the hell they want with their life. But if people are going to adopt that mentality, you're better off not doing things that damage your health and damage your life in other ways, in terms of having healthy relationships, being able to be at social events, etc. If you're doing things that are problematic in all of those different areas under the guise of, I want to do this to lose weight, it's a real problem. And getting people to keep that in perspective, and as I said, realizing we really just have influence over our weight. And that is a really important point for people to get, because basically if those other two things, if that doesn't happen, the other two ideas I'm going to suggest really don't work. Mm-hmm. So the second idea I would say is getting someone to start to listen to their body and start to use a level of intuition, whether we're talking about with food, whether we're talking about with exercise, sleep, etc., to best support their body. And for a lot of clients, it's largely around the food side of things, and exercise, I'd say, in second place with that, because it's hard to think what is going to best serve me from a food perspective and really listen to the true response around that, if at the back of your mind is, but what about weight? Because it means you're only ever going to accept a certain group of answers when you ask yourself, what should I eat, if weight is the main focus. So once you can get to that place where, and look, these are all things that can be worked on side by side. They're not things that go away overnight. And for a lot of clients, this is a couple of years to work through a lot of these things. But yeah, the more someone can be okay with their weight, the more that they can allow themselves to start to listen to intuition and break down a lot of the arbitrary rules around food. Because a lot of those rules where people are like, well, I can't have carbs, or I've got to keep my calories at a certain amount, or whatever it may be, really, even though people talk about them as being about health, most of the time are really about weight. Mm-hmm. And so the third thing I would say is getting people to have interests and pursuits and areas of their life that have very little to do with food and exercise, that are then important about them having a sense of significance, having a sense of purpose in their life, having their sense of self-esteem pulled from. Because too often, especially for women, although unfortunately it's becoming more common for men as well, their sense of who they are and what they're about within life is so much about my weight or my appearance. And so because for a lot of people that has become what their life has been about for the last couple of years, 5 years, decades even for certain clients, so much of what life really should be about and the things that bring someone pleasure or purpose or sense of who they are have just dropped by the wayside and drifted away. And so getting people to include more of these things in life, to even just to start to find out what they are, because if someone hasn't really given that stuff much thought for so many years, it is a real process to be like, well, who am I? Who is my identity without this stuff? But over the long haul, that's the thing that really starts to make a difference for someone. And it's probably something that people are dealing with later on, but it's the thing that gets someone out of constantly trying to be in recovery, mm-hmm. and get someone past that point so that they actually become a normal eater, or they become someone who really doesn't think about food that much, apart from, you know what, I'm hungry, what's going to best serve me, and things about exercise from a point of what sounds like it's going to be fun today, or what's going to be helpful for me to move my body, for lots of other reasons, as opposed to just how it's going to impact on someone's weight or waist measurement or whatever it may be. So yeah, really, really the important ones for me are like, number one is getting people okay with whatever their weight may be. 2, getting someone to become more in tune with listening to their body, especially around food. And 3, getting someone to have a better sense of purpose and significance and self-esteem that are drawn from areas that don't relate to how someone looks.
I love that you touched upon that because I think that a lot of people really describe themselves and see themselves only as, how their body looks and how they think their body looks. And that led me to my next question. So why do we think that sometimes we allow, the way we look to become such an important part in our life, and forgetting everything that you mentioned just now, like in your third point, which I think is a vital thing that everyone needs to implement in their life?
It's because this is the message that is sold to us. Like it's the message that drives the economy. It's why people buy things. It's why people sign up to weight loss boot camps. It's why people sign up to dieting, etc. We're kept in this state of feeling not enough and of being fearful and all these other negative emotions so that we will be consumers. And so I think that this is a message that is just sold to us all the time. And so it's almost like radical or counterintuitive to think of it any other way, because what would ever tell us anything different? And so it is a real sad reality that's what's being promoted day in and day out. But as I said earlier on, it's not really true. And what you then start to look at, if you really dig into the research around like what makes people truly happy, what makes people have longevity, what makes people have better health, like so much of it has either very little to do with food and exercise, or if it is, it's like a component of it. And B, much more to do with having healthy relationships, having a sense of community, getting to bed on time, like all of these things that so often people just negate or don't even think about or put in the bracket of worthless, because it's not like them putting in like blood, sweat and tears and really working at something and almost punishing themselves as a sense of, well, if I'm not punishing myself, then obviously I'm not trying hard enough. I don't know if that answers the question properly. It's a bit of a roundabout way of answering it, but I really do think a lot of it is just from a consumer perspective and keeping people in that state.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you made, because even like sometimes I've got two boys, age 9 and 5, and the sad thing is that every now and again they will come home with some kind of leaflet in their book bag talking about healthy food and how healthy choices. And even, at such a young stage, young age and stage in their life, is seeing that pure selling, point is just outrageous. And then they come home completely confused by what they've seen. It's like, well, Mom, why is this, because I talk to them a lot about, things like that, how they can learn to make the best choices in their life. And they come home completely confused. It's like what we've been talking at home is something completely different than, what is mentioned out there, which is the sad part.
It is. And I think for me as well, the sad part is there's a lot of judgment, a lot of moralising, a lot of shame around something that doesn't deserve any of these things. And so I think there's almost a sense of, if we didn't talk about it in this way, people aren't going to make healthful choices. Like, if we don't tell people that they're going to lose weight through exercise, who in their right mind would ever do exercise? Or if we didn't tell people that eating vegetables was going to help them lose weight, like, why would anyone eat vegetables? And it's a really sad state of affairs, because what typically happens when you have someone who is very much in listening to the intuition within their body is those are the foods that eventually they gravitate towards, because they start to feel better on that stuff. And that doesn't mean that someone loses their palate and doesn't enjoy the taste of pizza or burgers or milkshakes or whatever. But what someone starts to notice is the more that often that they eat that stuff, the more that they don't feel that great on it, and so they don't eat it. It's not from a point of, I've got to like self-flagellate and chastise myself for this. It's from the point of, it doesn't actually do that well for me, so I don't eat it so much. And really, I think that for me, needs to be more of the message that is put out to people of like, let's find ways that you can be healthy, that you actually enjoy doing it, and people are actually going to get to that place. And this is a really complex issue, and there's lots of things that get in the way of that being successful in terms of poverty, availability of food, people having the time to do this. Like there are lots of moving parts that can mess with this. But I think the overall message where you pretty much shame people and judge people into having them eat well has pretty disastrous results.
Yeah. So what is your thought now that you mentioned this is what do you think about the whole idea of like good foods and bad foods, and how does that affect how we actually implement that into our emotions when it comes to our relationship with food?
Thinking about things in terms of good and bad rarely works well. And part of the reason it rarely works well is food is context specific. So whether something is good or bad for someone will depend on the individual and will depend on the situation that food is being eaten, depend on how they are that day, etc. So you can have a situation where a McDonald's cheeseburger is a very healthy food, and you can have a situation where someone having some steamed kale is one of the worst things that they could do. And so for me, getting people to move away from absolute terms, black and white thinking around food is really important, because it then gets in the way of something I was talking about before in terms of intuition. And so it doesn't allow someone to intuitively eat and listen to what works for their body. Because what happens countless times when I'm working with clients, and pretty much every time when I'm working with a client, is that we will find groups of foods that are healthy, in inverted commas, that actually do terribly for them. They have it causes lots of gas or bloating or upset, or it doesn't do well for energy purposes for them, for lots of reasons. And so the advice then through their own discovery is not that those foods are bad, it's that actually you should be eating less of those things or having them very infrequently because they just don't do well for you. And equally, we find foods that are quote-unquote bad foods that they do really well on, that they should be including more of in their diet, because not only do they not do poorly on it, that it helps in terms of energy, it helps to keep them warm, it helps to help with all of these different areas relating to whatever symptoms they're dealing with. And so we then move away from thinking about things in terms of good and bad and get to a place where we're thinking about things in terms of what works for someone's body, and I mean genuinely works for their body, because we've discovered that through trial and error. And trial and error is always a term where people think you're just like chucking stuff up against a wall and seeing what sticks. And that's not what I'm doing when I'm working with people. It's trial and error based on me understanding physiology, me understanding what are their different symptoms that they've got going on, and like knowing what different foods or macronutrients or micronutrients are going to be most helpful in those situations, and then trying it out. And trying it out because of there's research around that stuff, and then seeing what happens for that individual. Because just because some research paper or just because some trial said it's really great or it's good at a population level doesn't necessarily mean it's helpful for that individual. So, yeah, the good and bad food idea is not something that's great. I mean, the other thing I would add to that is the more that people have that kind of mentality, the more likely they are to A, diet, but B, eating a boom and bust type style where when I'm good, I'm good, and when I'm bad, I'm bad. And once I blow my diet, then like, what the hell? And you then have an afternoon, a day, a week, a couple of weeks of really poor eating, because it's like, well, you know what, I've ruined it, so what the hell? And so the more that people don't have that feeling, the more than like, you know what, I had a cupcake, but it doesn't matter. And then they go on to have their dinner, and their dinner is then just a normal everyday meal that they would have, versus, well, now I'm going to go out and get such and such because I've ruined it anyway. Like, the more we can move away from that stuff, the better.
Mm-hmm. I think that is slightly linked to actually something that you wrote in your book, The Health Trap. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, and how healthy eating and clean eating actually, change our perspective of what we actually should be eating?
Sure. So the health trap came about because of, as I mentioned in the introduction or the earlier part of this chat, me seeing lots of clients in practice who were doing a lot of the things that they were told to be doing to support their health and then getting anything but great results. So they were eating lots of steamed vegetables, doing lots of juicing, having lots of quinoa, everything was organic. They'd only shop at these particular supermarkets and all of that, but yet their health was still really suffering. And so what I started to identify is, looking at all this, is there were some real common trends with these types of people. Like, they were eating a lot of healthy food, but food that's pretty difficult to digest. So we are not ruminant animals. We don't possess the capability to break down large amounts of cellulose and other parts of plants that were then making up a huge part of these people's diets. There was a lot of undereating, whether this be intentional or unintentional. And the thing is, when you undereat, the body stops thinking about long-term health and starts thinking about short-term survival. So many of the important functions that you need as part of your day-to-day living, like your ability to digest your food properly, your ability to procreate, or as a female to have normal, regular menstrual cycles, so many of the functions just get put on hold because your body, in a sense, is looking at we don't have the resources to do that stuff. We're in a situation where, from your body's perspective, we are fleeing a lion, we're needing to get out of life and death danger. It's not important to digest your food. It's not important to give you a libido. It's not important to have hormones in the right balance so that you can get a normal pain-free cycle. And so getting people to understand that they're under-eating, whether that be intentional or unintentional, is having a problem there. And just as part of the book, just looking at those are a couple of the ideas, but more and more issues that people are facing and how those things then fall into or are being caused by their pursuit of health. And so really the main tenets of the book is just looking at how for so many people, and again, this is not to say this is what is happening with everyone. There are certain sections of the population who don't eat very well and could do with eating more fruits and vegetables and taking some of the ideas that these people are following. But at the same time, you have a lot of people who then take health to the nth degree. And at some tipping point, you get to a place where instead of this now being healthy for you, it's now starting to cause problems. And so that was the idea of the book, and it was what I was seeing so much in practice, and it's still what I see in practice today. And it is quite ironic that for a lot of the advice I'm giving clients as a nutritionist, it's you need to just relax around food. You need to be having more variety in your diet. You need to be having more junk food or processed food come in because there's real fears and worries and anxiety around this stuff. And I need you to understand that it's not the end of the world. And that doesn't mean that people need to go out and eat this stuff intentionally in large amounts. But for a lot of people, they need to be okay with the fact that there's going to be some family gathering at a place where you don't know who made the food, or it's got certain nasties in it that you're not okay with, and having that be it's just food, it's just a meal, as opposed to this is going to induce a meltdown.
Yeah. So would you say that there is a thing called best choices when it comes to food?
Definitely. And I think there is better or worse foods that people can eat. And again, this comes back to context. And when I'm working with people, and again, it will depend on who I work with, because I do work with people who are coming from a disordered eating background. And then there's people that I'm working with where it is very much straight up nutrition. And so depending on the individual, it's how much are we going to really labor that point of getting them to be eating better quality foods, etc. But getting people to understand what's important at what time. So there are really good reasons for people to go out and have a meal that might be slightly less healthy if it then means that they're getting to catch up with friends, getting to see family, having that meal be meaning much more and be more than just the food that is then consumed. And realizing that, yes, food should be important in terms of what it provides to us from a nourishment and a nutrition perspective, but that's not the only reason that food is consumed by us, and it's not the only reason that food is important. And for me, there isn't anything inherently wrong with someone emotionally eating, because I think we all emotionally eat at times. It's understanding how often is that happening? How much is that having an impact on someone's health? Because if it's something that happens a couple of times a month and someone has that very much in check in terms of their emotions, I've had a tough day at work. I don't really feel like cooking today. You know what? I would like to have a Thai meal. That would be really nice. It would be really comforting. And then having that Thai meal, they then give it no second thought afterwards. They're not berating themselves and telling themselves that they're weak-willed or they shouldn't have had it or whatever. That's a very different scenario to someone who's constantly emotionally eating off the back of lots of restriction and trying to do their best, and then they do emotionally eat and they feel terrible and having those real big swings back and forth. And so, yeah, getting someone to understand the difference between those two and getting them to that place where emotional eating is a much smaller facet within someone's life and it's not having a detrimental effect to their health. It's just a part of their everyday life, the way that it is for a lot of people.
So what would you say will be the most important thing to break the vicious cycle between the negative impact on having something that you feel you shouldn't be having, and then you go back to, all this sense of guilt and, bad negative emotions?
It's the judgment. It really is the judgment, because without the judgment, that food has really no meaning. So it's what you're then telling yourself about that particular food. What's the story that you're creating is going to happen to you? Because you can have two people who eat, let's say, a cupcake. And from a nutritional standpoint, a cupcake doesn't have, say, a huge amount of value. Like, people could argue, yes, it's going to give you some calories, and if someone's really in need of it, that's going to be helpful. But there are probably much better food choices that someone could be making. When I say better, I mean in inverted commas.
Yeah.
You then have someone who in an afternoon gets offered a cupcake at work and eats that cupcake. 2 minutes later, they've forgotten they've even eaten it. They've got back on with their work, and then they go about their everyday life. You then have another person who is offered the cupcake. There's lots of toing and froing, like, oh, God, I really want it, but should I or shouldn't I? Like 10 minutes later, they finally eat the cupcake in like half a second without even tasting it because it gets inhaled, and then they spend the next 3-4 hours thinking about, what am I going to have for dinner tonight that's going to make up for the cupcake? How much time do I need to spend at the gym to negate the extra calories that I've just eaten, etc.? Both of those people made the exact same food choice. Only one of them is then having really serious implications because of that. And so the way that people stop this stuff is not controlling the food per se. It's controlling their thoughts around what those food episodes mean to them. And the more that people can then do that and they just let it go, the less that they do it. And it's really ironic because people think the more that I'm like hard on myself, the more that I focus on this, the better it's going to be. And it's actually the other way around. There's a study that I talk about as part of in my book, and there's been like numerous studies done on this in terms of ice cream and milkshakes. It's a thing that a lot of researchers like to use because they are comfort foods, but they're also foods that have a lot of negative associations with people. And so what they'll do in the different studies is they'll do some kind of questionnaire to start with to see what type of an eater someone is. So is someone Are they someone who really tries to actively restrict bad food? Are they someone who feels guilty about having bad food when it comes in? And as part of that, you can put people into two categories. One is like a normal eater in terms of if they eat bad food, it just happens. They don't really think about it. If they do eat that, there's no real emotional attachment, versus someone who is pretty much like a dieter in terms of there is a real fear and worry about that stuff. And if it does come in, there's a lot of judgment and shame and different negative emotions about that experience. And so they'll then get these people to have a milkshake, or they'll have them have no milkshakes, or they'll have them have 2 milkshakes. And then afterwards, they'll get them to taste some ice cream. And the tests are always done when they give them these ideas about what it really means or why they're really doing the test. So they don't outright say that we're doing it to test how much this is impacting or how much dieting impacts on someone's eating. It's like we want to test how having a cold drink before having this ice cream affects your taste of certain flavors or something along those lines. And so they give them 3 ice cream flavors, and normally it's something along the lines of, when we're done with this little experiment, we're going to just bin all of this ice cream. So go ahead and have as much as you want, because once you're done, like, it's going to be chucked out. And they normally give them like a huge amount of ice cream. So there's this massive amount of ice cream in front of them. No matter how much they really eat, there's going to be no appreciable dent put in it. And what they then see at the end of those tests is that someone who is a normal eater will regulate based on how many milkshakes they had. So if someone had 2 milkshakes, they'll eat the least amount of ice cream. If someone's had 1 milkshake, they'll have a little more ice cream. If someone had no milkshakes, they'll eat the most amount of ice cream. What happens with the flip side, with someone who is a dieter or someone who feels badly about eating these kinds of foods and actively tries to avoid them in everyday life, is there is a counter-regulation effect, meaning the opposite happens. So the person who had no milkshakes only eats a small amount of ice cream. The person who had 1 milkshake eats more ice cream. The person who had 2 milkshakes eats the most amount of ice cream. And it's the thought of, well, I've already blown my diet, so what the hell? And so getting people away from the idea that if I have these real strict rules, if I use negative emotions, it's going to help me be a better eater, because like research paper after research paper, experiment after experiment shows that this isn't the case. And the best way to have someone be a normal eater is by getting rid of a lot of those rules and that those emotions associated with those foods.
Oh, that's a very interesting study. So what would you say would be your number one recommendation, and something that we haven't touched upon that you think is a really, really important part?
Number one recommendation in terms of what? Are we talking about from a food nutritional perspective? Are we talking about from a healing emotional eating perspective?
Healing emotional eating perspective. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of what I've talked about, I think, is really important. Another thing that really comes to mind is compassion. Mm-hmm. And people need to be compassionate with themselves around this stuff. And as I hinted at or mentioned before, it can take a long time to get over this. And it's not something where you're like, right, I'm going to get over it, and then a week or a couple of weeks later, it's all done. It is going to be, with pretty much anything in life that's worth accomplishing, it's going to be tough, and it's going to be like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And as opposed to thinking like when there is those 1 steps back of I've made a mistake, I'm such a failure, it's like, no, this is just part of the course. And that 1 step back is where you learn something about yourself. And you learn, okay, next time I'll do it differently, or I didn't know that was a trigger for me, or whatever it may be. And so getting people to come to this from a place of like compassion, and also I'm always one for trying to find the silver linings in something. So what can you learn from this experience? And so when people can approach it from that way and see this as a learning experience, as a growth experience, I think it's much better. And as part of that, a lot of the clients that I work with who then get over this stuff there are genuine benefits that they've got from their life through going through this. Like, they become much more compassionate people within their everyday life. They become better at being a mother, or they become better at being a partner, because there's this level of understanding of things that they've been through, looking at things in a different way, how people experience things differently. And so the more that someone can see this experience, as much as I'm not saying people shouldn't want to get over it, you do want to get past this. But rather than thinking like, what a waste, why did I waste these 5 years, 10 years, whatever, it's like, what can I learn from this, and what am I able to get out of this experience that if I hadn't gone through this, I would have never been able to see. And that can also really help to make it, I don't want to say easier, but at least it can feel a little bit more worthwhile.
Okay, well, Chris, thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us today. It's been absolutely amazing. Can you please tell everyone where they can find you, where they can find more about your work, and how they can get in touch with you?
Sure. So my website, so my company is called 7 Health. My website is www.7, so spelt out, SEVEN-health.com. And I put out a blog post like once, sometimes twice a week there. So there's lots of free information. I have a podcast called Real Health Radio, which you can find on my website if you go there and hit the podcast tab, or you can search for it in iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you can listen to podcasts. And that is a weekly podcast show. I have I alternate between weeks. 1 week will be with a guest and talking about lots of emotional eating topics or nutrition topics. And then I will do a show on my own every other week as well, where I explore one topic in a lot of detail. And so they're two things that I would recommend people like checking out and how they can get in contact with me. Social media, I am not the best on social media except for Facebook. So for Facebook, it's 7, the number 7 Health. And you'll be able to find my page there. And I'm really active on the Facebook page. So there'll be a couple of articles that go out pretty much every day, and that's linking to some of my stuff, but it's mostly other people who I really follow, and just curating content that I think is very helpful for people. Again, looking at emotional eating, restriction, and then also from different health side of things, whether we're talking about health in terms of hormones and reproduction or digestion or whatever it may be. So yeah, they are the main areas that people can find me. And as you also mentioned, the book called The Health Trap, which you can find on Amazon.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much once again for sharing all your knowledge, and not all of your knowledge, but so much of your knowledge with us. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll chat again soon.
Well, look, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a really great chat that we've had, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to listening to all of the other talks in the summit.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7, SEVEN-health.com.